Good morning. We're ready to call the board meeting to order. It is 10:03 a.m. on Tuesday, December 17, 2024. Ms. Cicchetti, if you would please call the roll.
Good morning. Alrighty. Chair Lieber.
Here.
Vice Chair Gaines.
Here.
Member Vasquez.
Present.
Member Schaefer.
Aye.
Deputy Controller Emron.
Present.
Members, the quorum is present and the board meeting is called to order. We will start with our Pledge of Allegiance led by Mr. Vasquez.
Ready to begin. Pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. We'll go now to member brief opening remarks. Mr. Vasquez.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning to all. I'd first like to highlight the Universal Human Rights Month, celebrated globally each year during December, to recognize the anniversary of the adoption by the United Nations General Assembly of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights on December 10th, 1948. The Declaration enshrines the inalienable rights that everyone is entitled to as a human being, regardless of their race, religion, gender, native language, political inclination, national or social origin, property ownership, economic status, etc. Available in 577 languages, the Declaration is considered the most translated document in the world. Recognizing human rights can empower individuals and communities to forge a better tomorrow by embracing and entrusting the full power of human rights as the path to the world we want. We can become more peaceful, equal, and sustainable. And then last, I just wanted to recognize all the holidays we're going to be having here this December, some that have already started, before we come back in January. And I'll begin with, first of all, just happy holidays to all, recognizing all the different celebrations people celebrate, beginning with Las Posadas, which actually started yesterday, goes until the 24th. And then, of course, you have winter solstice, which is December the 21st. And then, of course, you got Christmas Eve and Christmas Day. You have Kwanzaa, which starts the 26th of the 1st. And Hanukkah, I think this is the first time that I remember that Hanukkah actually lands on Christmas. So that goes from the 25th to the 2nd. And, of course, you got New Year's and New Year's Day. And last but not least is Los Tres Reyes, which is the Three Kings Day, which is January the 6th. And with that, I'll turn it back over to the chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Emron.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning to you all. Good morning to the executive agency as well. Here we go, December 2024. We have just about 6 hours to go before we're all home free. But first, over the weekend, the controller and I had the great privilege of attending a wreaths across America at the National Presidio Cemetery, honoring our veterans. It's a long-standing tradition that the controller and I get to take a part of, and this, along with 2 million volunteers across our country. So even on a cold and rainy day in December, veterans and families gather to pay respect, remember the fallen, to prisoners of war, those missing in action, and honor those who are serving or have served in the great nation's armed services. It's a solemn reminder we are one nation, proud to live in a society made up of citizens from all walks of life to be able to chase their dreams and realize their full potential. The United States of America was founded on the ideals of freedom and justice and equality. Our nation stands as a shining beacon of liberty and freedom to the world. But these freedoms we enjoy today have not come without a price. We thank those who have made the ultimate sacrifice to keep us free, and we shall not forget you. So on that cold December day, as we laid the holiday wreath on each headstone of our nation's fallen heroes, it's a testament to the unshakable spirit of those who, in times of conflict and in times of peace, answer the call to serve. Their sacrifices were not in vain, and we make a promise to teach our children and the next generation the value of freedom, because remembrance is a living, breathing act, not confined to a single day or ceremony. It is continuous action for us all to continue to uphold, and something we can pay forward with kindness, respect, and dignity to each other. That will truly capture the spirit of the freedoms we fight so hard to preserve. Thank you so much, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Schaefer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Historically, I always share with us an important birthday or two, and then I give my little 3 minutes. I'm going to waive the 3 minutes and concentrate on the birthday. We're celebrating this month the birthday of the Christ child. And that's all we need to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schaefer. Mr. Gaines.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to, I guess, announce a blessing. I would call it a blessing. We've got 4 grandchildren coming. So we've got 3 of our daughters are pregnant and a daughter-in-law. So they're all coming next year. So we're very excited about that opportunity. And I hope everybody has a great celebration, whatever their faith is. And as a Christian, I'll be celebrating Christmas. Looking forward to that and gathering of family and friends. Thank you.
Thank you, and congratulations on that. It's going to be a really incredible and exciting year for you.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. And members, I just wanted to report very briefly at last month's meeting, I let you know about a hearing that we were having on December 10th at the FTB. And we did hold our hearing on work assets and the safety net. The Controller's Office and the Deputy Controller were very helpful in that process. And we had representation from the State Assembly, Assembly Member Dr. Corey Jackson, also Amy Everett, President of Golden State Opportunity. They're the foremost agency working to get Californians to gain access to the Earned Income Tax Credit. A speaker from the California Federation of Labor Unions, also Service Employees International Union, their state council, Mr. Devin Gray, who's president of End Poverty in California, Terry Ali, California Director of Economic Security, California, also Mark Stivers from the California Housing Partnership, representative of the Western Center on Law and Poverty, and Alyssa Anderson, Policy Director of the California Budget and Policy Center. I think it was a very pivotal hearing, and I'll be forwarding to members here a link once the video is put up, because there was a lot of very fruitful discussion about what we need to do to get more assets into the hands of working families in California. So thank you so much, and we'll go to
May I-
Mr. Imran, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to take a quick moment to recognize you and your whole team for that hard work. I thought it was an incredible hearing, first of its kind, to help those in poverty. And we understand it's a big issue. It's a widening gap between working class families and the rich. And I think as government, we have that duty to do everything we can to help. So once again, bravo, and looking forward to continuing those discussions.
Well, thank you so much. We really appreciate your partnership on it. It was a very smooth hearing. Mr. Imran had 9 speakers to contend with and got us out at 2 hours and 14 seconds, and our target was just 2 hours. So you can't beat that. And we dedicated that meeting and our efforts to platform the concerns of working families to the people who are working in California, the essential workers, and also to those Californians who are just a part of the fabric of our state. And so that was very moving, and we do thank you so much for your help with that. And we'll go on to Ms. Cicchetti for our safety and informational announcement, please.
All right, good morning again. Our first order of business is our safety and informational announcement. Welcome to the Malee State Office Complex. Our safety announcement. In the auditorium, the exits are in front at each side of the stage, and other exits are located at the rear of the auditorium. Please take a moment to find the exit sign and location closest to you in the event of an emergency. The emergency exits behind and to the side of the stage should only be used in case of an emergency. Our informational announcement. This meeting will be live streamed to the public and posted to the BoE YouTube channel. Therefore, we ask all speakers to state their names before speaking for the record. We ask that you speak clearly and slowly into the microphone. I want to remind the audience to silence their cell phones and other wireless devices. Note that public comments are taken after each agenda item. The public will be invited to comment on matters before the board. If there are any members of the public wishing to speak before the board on any agenda item in person, we ask that you complete and submit to the Sergeant of Arms a public comment appearance sheet located at the entrance of the auditorium. If you wish to speak before the board by telephone, please dial the phone number and access code provided on our public agenda notice and follow the instructions of the AT&T moderator. If you intend to make a public comment today using the AT&T moderator, we recommend dialing into the meeting on the teleconference line before the beginning of the agenda item you wish to comment on. We recommend this as the audio broadcast on our website experiences a 1 to 3 minute delay between the live stream and the live event. When giving public comments, please limit your remarks to 3 minutes. This concludes the safety and informational announcements. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And we'll go on to item 1. This is public comment on matters that are not on the agenda. Persons who wish to address the Board of Equalization regarding items not on the agenda may do so under this item. Please note that the board cannot act on items that are not on our agenda today. However, the board can schedule issues raised by the public for consideration at future meetings. When giving your public comment, please limit your remarks to 3 minutes. We do not have any written communications, nor anyone in the auditorium having submitted a speaker card. So we'll go to our AT&T moderator. Moderator, if you would please let us know if there is anyone on the telephone who would like to make a public comment regarding item 1 on today's agenda.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, if you would like to comment on item number 1, please press 1 followed by 0 at this time. 1 followed by 0. Madam Chair, nobody is queuing up.
Thank you. Hearing no comments, we will move on to our next item, which is Tax Program Matters, Property Tax Appeal Oral Hearing. And Mr. Keddy will make an announcement regarding this item.
All righty. Good morning again. The remote oral hearing. Oh, I apologize, yes. The remote oral hearing procedure is as follows. For the petitioner and representatives, while waiting in the Microsoft Teams environment, please be ready to unmute and turn on your camera as requested. After the administrative announcements, the chair will introduce the oral hearing. Then the appeals attorney, Ms. Wilkman, will introduce your case. After the appeals attorney has completed the introduction, the parties will then be asked to introduce themselves and their affiliation with the taxpayer, the petitioner, or the State Assessed Property Division, the department, for the record. Contribution disclosure forms are required under Government Code Section 15626. The Chief of Board Proceedings Division has received completed contribution disclosure forms for all parties, agents, and participants for this property tax appeal oral hearing. All board members indicated that their records disclose no disqualifying contributions from these taxpayers, their agents, or participants. The Chief of Board Proceedings provided the board members' offices with an ex parte memorandum listing all parties, agents, and participants to ensure there were no ex parte violations. No violations have been disclosed. This is a constitutional function. This hearing is conducted under Section 40 of the Revenue and Tax Code. To prepare for this oral hearing, board members have access to the records to review and consider the merits of this property tax appeal oral hearing, including but not limited to the petition, opening brief, reply brief, hearing exhibits, and summary decision. After the board hears the oral arguments today from the representatives of the petitioner and the department, and considers the evidence, it may vote to adopt the staff recommendation, reject it, or make its determination to resolve the issue under consideration in the hearing. The petitioner and the respondent, the department, will each have 20 minutes to make their initial presentation. Then the petitioner will have 10 minutes for rebuttal, followed by questions from the board members. This concludes the review of the administrative procedure for the oral hearing.
Thank you, Mr. Keddy. And so we'll proceed now with item 2, the Tax Program Matters Property Tax Appeals Oral Hearing, Petition for Reassessment of 2024 Unitary Value. And this is concerning Southern California Edison Company. And the appeals attorney, Ms. Wilkman, will introduce this matter.
Good morning, Chair Lieber and honorable members of the board. My name is Sarah Wilkman, the appeals attorney for the State Board of Equalization on this case. In the case before you, the petitioner is Southern California Edison Company, a public utility operating in Southern, Coastal, and Central California. The 2024 board-adopted unitary value is $38,986,400,000. Petitioner is requesting a revised 2024 unitary value of $32,915,600,000, while respondent, or SAPD, is requesting that the board affirm the 2024 unitary value. Based on the unitary values asserted in this petition, this appeal is subject to Revenue and Taxation Code Section 40. After the board decides this petition today, the appeals attorney will prepare a decision in early 2025 for the board's consideration to memorialize the board's action and to provide transparency to the public. In addition to the general concerns and assertions detailed in the hearing summary, petitioner has raised 5 primary legal issues with its 2024 board-adopted unitary value, which was based on the 2024 lien date, January 1st, 2024. As such, the parties will summarize and emphasize the arguments that have been iterated in the briefings, including these 5 primary issues. First, whether petitioner has shown that respondent has failed to reconcile the historical cost less depreciation, or HCLD, value indicator, and the capitalized earning ability, or CEA, indicator of value. Second, whether petitioner has shown that respondent erred in placing 75% reliance on the HCLD value indicator and 25% reliance on the CEA indicator of value. Third, whether the petitioner has shown that respondent must adjust the board-adopted value for petitioner's liabilities related to the 2017 and 2018 wildfires and mudslides. Fourth, whether petitioner has shown that respondent improperly assessed the wildfire mitigation capital expenditures. And fifth, whether petitioner has shown that the respondent erred in its treatment of wildfire insurance fund-related contributions. Chair Lieber and members, please note petitioner has the burden of proof to show that the 2024 board-adopted assessment is incorrect or illegal with specificity as to any or all of these issues. Said another way, the 2024 board-adopted value is lawful and correct unless specifically disproven by the petitioner. As a preliminary matter to the parties' presentations, there is an evidentiary issue for the board to resolve. Petitioner has requested that the board take official notice of the litigation complaints filed in Superior Court for tax years 2020, 2021, 2022, and 2023 as exhibits to the current appeal. Staff rejected the complaints as unsolicited in the 2024 appeal as mandated by the board's regulations. In response, petitioner has requested that the board address this request at oral hearing. I note that it is undisputed that petitioners' 2020 to 2023 tax years are currently the subject of litigation in state court, as clearly reflected on the public record and in the board's own website. However, the complaints are reflective of petitioners' unverified prior year complaints, and as such, they are outside the scope of the 2024 appeal before the board. Here, we are advising that the petitioner's prior year complaints should remain excluded as exhibits to ensure that the record reflects the fact that the 2024 appeal stands on its own for consideration by this board, based on the substance of the 2024 assessment and the related appeals process. Accordingly, I am instead asking that the board take notice of the existence of the lawsuits between itself and petitioner regarding the 2020 through 2023 tax years. I'd ask that the board confirm agreement with this recommendation.
Thank you, Ms. Wilkman. Members, is there any objection to taking official notice of the 2020 to 2023 litigation between the board and petitioner? And seeing none, so noticed. Ms. Wilkman, you may proceed.
Thank you. It's my understanding that the parties are present, whether in person or virtually, and are ready to present their cases before the board. This concludes the appeals attorney's opening remarks, and I turn it over to you, Chair Lieber, to proceed to hear the parties on this petition.
Thank you, Ms. Wilkman. Welcome to the Board of Equalization. And petitioner, if you would please unmute your microphone there, introduce yourselves, and state your affiliation with the taxpayer for the record.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the board. My name is Marty DeKessian. I'm with the law firm DeKessian Law. I'm joined by my colleagues today, Andrew Bedeau and Joshua Lynn, as well as our co-counsel, Mr. Charles Mole, with the law firm of McDermott, Will & Emery. We represent Southern California Edison Company and its millions of ratepayers whom I believe reside in each of the 4 equalization districts. With us from Edison today are Ms. Andrea Wood, Vice President of Tax, Mr. Carl Matthews, Principal Manager, and Mr. David Lee, Tax Manager. That, I think, concludes our appearances. So thank you for having us here today.
Thank you. Southern California Edison Company, you may begin your presentation. Mr. DeKessian, you and your colleagues have 20 minutes to present your case. Additionally, after the conclusion of the department's presentation, you will be given time for a rebuttal, followed by any questions from the board members. Please note that our clerk will provide you with a 5-minute warning as you near the end of your presentation time. You may present.
Thank you very much. So before I begin our presentation, just one housekeeping note. Thank you for accepting the taking official notice of the 4 lawsuits. I appreciate that. We do have one objection we wanted to note regarding staff's proposed exhibits because we believe they violate your own rules. So staff submitted about 2,609 pages of exhibits over our objections 1 week before this hearing. Your rules require the parties to provide any documents to the other side at least 14 days before the hearing. So I will note those objections. The appeals division has not acted upon our objections, so we're raising them here today. We would just note them. We would just note that the rules require greater advance notice, but it's up to your board as to what to do with those documents. So,
Thank you.
So with that, yes.
We have Ms. Wilkman responding before you begin your presentation. Please.
I'd just like to note for the board's reference that petitioner was counseled that if an exhibit is introduced by respondent at the hearing, that the objections would be appropriate at that time to list. But I would note that 91% of the documents that Mr. DeKessian is referring to were discussed in the briefings by both parties and included in the hearing summary.
Thank you. Mr. DeKessian, you may begin your presentation.
Thank you. Thank you. So we've had this discussion a few times before in years past. There really are no surprises here. The issues that we're presenting all relate to the ongoing wildfire crisis and its impact on the value of Edison's property. So because of your familiarity with these issues, I'll jump right into it. I'm going to take them a little bit out of the order that Ms. Wilkman presented them, not for any particular reason, but because I think the presentation works better this way. So the first issue we would like to address is the Wildfire Insurance Fund initial contribution. We believe that staff should have allowed Edison to annualize its initial $2.4 billion contribution to the Wildfire Insurance Fund, just as the board's own assessor's handbook directs. Staff says that it shouldn't have to do so because the contribution occurred before the lien date. But here, we're using a direct capitalization approach, which looks at 1 year's income and determines the value based on that 1 year. And so your assessor's handbook has directed that if you have a prepaid expense, and the example that they use is the one we have here, prepaid insurance, to get to stabilized income, to be capitalized, you annualize expenses. In other words, if you have a prepaid expense, then you annualize it so that you don't, in this particular valuation model, have value fluctuations from year to year, since it's only based on 1 year's worth of income. It's what your own handbook requires. So, and this is how it's reflected on an annualized basis on Edison's audited financial statements. So that should be allowed. The staff's other objection is that we haven't established that these expenses are recurring. Now, first of all, there isn't any requirement that the expenses be recurring in order to be deducted, but it really doesn't matter because the initial contribution is part of Edison's insurance costs. And I think that everyone here in this room would agree that insurance is a recurring and very important recurring expense for Edison. So staff's view is that an identical initial contribution under AB 1054 won't be made, but to us, that's of no moment. That's really irrelevant. This is a form of insurance, public insurance. So whether that insurance is public insurance, private insurance, self-insurance, this is an insurance cost. It is a recurring expense and needs to be taken into account. Setting all that aside, a willing buyer would certainly take this prepayment of insurance into account because when comparing two companies, one that's made the payment a day before the lien date and the other that has not made this payment at all, a willing buyer would certainly pay more for the company that has made the contribution because that's a major expense that's already been made, and the buyer would benefit from greater future cash flows, not having to incur that expense going forward. And that benefit of greater future cash flows represents an intangible asset that must be excluded from taxation because intangibles are not taxable. So whether it is a properly annualized insurance expense or it's an intangible, it needs to be removed from Edison's valuation. That's the first issue. The second issue is the wildfire claims liabilities. The wildfire claims liabilities relating to the 2017-2018 Thomas fires must be removed from both the historical cost and income indicators. Staff objects again that these are past expenses and therefore contrary to Rule 8, which seeks to capture a future income stream. But that's not correct. Although the events giving rise to these expenses are in the past, no one would debate that. The events took place in 2017 and 2018. The expenses we're requesting adjustments for are future expenses and future expenses that Edison will pay after insurance recoveries. So these are not past expenses. The events giving rise to the expenses are in the past, but the expenses that we're requesting adjustments for are future expenses. Point number one. Point number two, staff says that the expenses can't be deducted again because they are non-recurring. Again, nothing in the rules saying that the expenses need to be recurring, but I think staff is at odds with the broad scientific community that expects that wildfires will be recurring and wildfire-related expenses such as claims will be recurring as well. And I think it's fair to say that a reasonably prudent business person looking to purchase this property would have to factor in the cost of these continued claims. So staff says that Edison's actions have mitigated the risk of future wildfires. They said that last year during the oral hearing. They said it again in their briefing, but that only tells part of the story. It is, of course, true that Edison has taken appropriate measures to reduce wildfire risk. It is also true that these measures have improved the situation, but it's also true, according to the science, that the risk of wildfires still remains significant. These concepts are not inconsistent with one another. But those are words. And as we say, actions speak louder than words. And if we look to the actions of the insurance industry, which would be on the hook to pay for wildfire-related damages, those actions speak to us loudly and clearly. a large sector of the fire insurance industry, as we know, has left California. Period. They've left a large component of it. The problem has gotten so bad to the point that the Department of Insurance is now using its regulatory authority to try to bring them back in. That does not line up with staff's view of the wildfire crisis as something that has diminished significantly and that we should not be concerned about. As Board Member Gaines pointed out last year during the hearing, the Fair Plan program is in trouble because everyone's flocking to Fair Plan because insurance carriers don't want to underwrite this risk anymore. And it's to the point that Fair Plan is in trouble if there is a catastrophic fire. I think Board Member Gaines last year said that they have $1 billion worth of ability to pay claims, and that a catastrophic fire concentrated in a particular region, like say like Arrowhead, would result in $7 billion in claims. So does that line up with staff's assertion that wildfire claims are non-recurring expenses, or that the risk is mitigated so significantly that a willing buyer would not take it into account in purchasing Edison's assets? So as we sit here today, it's very easy for us to have this academic discussion. We still have the Franklin fire in Malibu that just occurred. It's only 54% contained as of today. We know a few weeks ago, the mountain fire ravaged Camarillo and destroyed, I believe, over 100 homes. And so we're less than a week away from winter, and yet these fires continue to rage. So anyone just paying attention to the news would see articles like the December 13 LA Times article that predicted the so-called wildfire season, in quotes, is going to continue into January, potentially due to bone-dry conditions, high winds in Southern California, which of course is Edison's service territory. So I think staff is painting an overly rosy picture here about one that doesn't comport with reality. Did Edison do what it needed to do to mitigate risk to the extent that it was able to? The answer is yes, but the risk is still significant, as you can tell. So staff also argues that these liabilities are not part of the assets, but they're liabilities of the business. But that doesn't make sense because in this regulated environment, Edison is strictly liable for damages caused by its property. In other words, Edison does not have to be at fault in any of this. The only thing required for Edison to be liable is for its equipment to have caused the fire. A vehicle can crash into an Edison power line, a branch can fall on an Edison power line, and a blaze can be ignited. Edison can be determined to have no fault at all, but it's still on the hook. And so it's not Edison, it's not, the claim accrues to the property, not to Edison's actions or judgment. So if a prudent investor were to buy that asset, it would know that despite its best efforts, it would still be liable for any damages caused by that asset. It's strict liability. So in any event, staff's position that these expenses are non-recurring runs counter to the established science, business considerations, the regulatory practice of the CPUC, the regulatory practice of the Department of Insurance, the eye test, and our common sense. Staff's position on this issue is completely untethered from fair market value. Okay, so the third issue is the wildfire mitigation capital expenditures. So in a regulated utility context, historical cost is driven by the CPUC rate base because that is what measures the earning power of the utility. In other words, if there was a potential purchaser wanting to buy these assets, they would look at CPUC's rate base. Can we all agree to that? Can we all agree that historical cost is there to measure the earning power of the utility? I think we can, because the words I just uttered about a potential purchaser are not my words. They're the words of your own counsel at last year's hearing. So staff agrees that historical cost is there to determine the earning power of the utility in a regulated environment. So why is it that they insist on including capital expenditures in the historical cost indicator that are not in the rate base and that Edison can't earn on? Remember, rate base is the base of assets that CPUC allows Edison to earn a return on, right? They compute the rate base, they compute an authorized rate of return based on the assets that comprise rate base, and then they get to Edison's earnings. And of course, this is what investors look to. Okay, so, but by law, we're not allowed to earn on these expenditures. The AB 1054 capital expenditures by law, we're not allowed to earn a return on them. We're also not allowed to include depreciation expense on these assets in our cost of service for rate-making purposes. So despite what staff tells you, there's no return on, return of, recovery on anything on any of this property. But just as important, because capital expenditures are non-income producing assets in this case, they don't have any assessable value because no willing buyer would pay for assets that do not earn a return. And that's the key concept that we keep coming back to. These are income producing assets and these assets, if they don't produce a return, then that's the valuation method ceases to lose relevance. In the alternative, the capital expenditures here created an intangible asset. So if someone were to argue, well, gee, I know you can't earn a return on them, but there's some other benefit to being in compliance with AB 1054, such as entry into the wildfire insurance fund and favorable standards in future proceedings for recovery of losses, I would say, okay, fine. In that situation, those are intangible rights and they're non-assessable anyway, so they must be removed. So whether you consider these to be intangibles, whether you consider them to be non-performing capital expenditures, they must be removed. Now, the final issue, and I know Ms. Wilkman said there were 5 issues, but I'm going to combine the reconciliation and the weighting because I think they go hand in hand. So as you know, staff is using a 75-25 historical cost to income approach weighting. 75 cost, 25 income. We believe that Rule 8, your board's own regulation, which has the force and effect of law, requires that the weighting here be predominantly, if not entirely, based on the income approach. Here's what Rule 8 says. This is your rule. The income approach is the preferred approach for the appraisal of improved real properties and personal properties when reliable sales data are not available, which is the case here, and the cost approaches are unreliable because the reproducible property has suffered considerable physical depreciation, functional obsolescence, or economic obsolescence. That's what we have here. Underperforming assets. Is a substantial over or under improvement is misplaced or is subject to legal restrictions on income that are unrelated to cost. Again, legal restrictions on income unrelated to cost. We can't recover on the AB 1054 capital expenditures, right? We have liability for claims that are potentially non-recoverable. These are legal restrictions on income in a regulated environment that impact the ability of the property to generate income. So staff's position last year, right, as expressed by its counsel during last year's hearing is that they were questioned, well, why are you using the 75-25 weighting? And what staff said is that because petitioner is rate regulated, we believe that HCLD is clearly the most reliable approach. And that's because in rate regulation, the regulator, the CPUC, begins with the value of the assets. And they take those value of the assets and then they determine how much income those assets earn. Okay, so far so good. We don't disagree. Staff continues. I don't think, this is staff's word, I don't think we would argue with the sort of the general premise that potential purchasers would look to the income. But if there was a potential purchaser wanting to purchase these assets, they would look at CPUC's rate base and the income that could produce over looking at our CEA income indicator. All right. So what staff is communicating here is that the historical cost approach is not inherently indicative of fair market value. It's only relevant here to the extent that the assets included in historical cost generate income, right? So the market doesn't care about net book value, right? If you go to buy a property of this nature, you're not going to go up to the seller and say, oh, please show me what the net book value is, right? Unless that is what the regulator is using on as a base to determine the earning power of the property, right? And if the regulator is excluding certain assets from the ability to generate income, then those assets need to be removed from rate base. And of course, the other sort of corollary principle here is that if you have underperforming assets, right?
5 minutes remaining.
Income, thank you. Not generating income, then that's called external obsolescence, right? The obsolescence must be cured by removing the non-income producing asset from the cost indicator. And if there's too much in the way of obsolescence, right? In other words, too many assets included in the historical cost indicator that don't generate income, then historical cost is not a reliable indicator of fair market value. Again, because no prudent investor would pay for assets that don't generate income. And so we're not saying that historical cost is inherently unreliable or that shouldn't be considered. We're saying that look at the full picture. Don't just say, oh, well, historical cost, this is regulated utility, end of discussion. No, look to see whether this is actually in line with the income indicator, because you have the historical cost and income indicators that are both designed to do one thing, which is to measure the earning power of the assets. Why is one $8 billion more than the other? That appears to me on its face that we have $8 billion in assets that don't generate income. That's what this appears to be. And your own handbook confirms that. Your own handbook says that even where Rule 3D provides that the appraiser shall consider historical costs as an appropriate indicator of value for rate-based regulated companies, the appraiser should also consider other indicators. For instance, an income indicator, which is much lower than historical cost, may indicate that obsolescence exists in the property to such an extent that the owner may not earn the rate of return allowed by the regulatory agency. Bingo. That's what's going on here. We presented that to staff. Staff says, oh, well, it says may. Oh, it says may indicate that obsolescence exists. But there's no other explanation listed there, nor has staff offered one in the 5 years plus of this dispute. So it is obsolescence. And because it's obsolescence, the historical cost approach, obsolescence in the billions, and the historical cost approach is 24% higher than the income approach, it's unreliable. The income approach is what a willing buyer would consider in an open market transaction, because cash flows are what matter to investors. We've offered staff several solutions to correct this. They can make the adjustments we requested. They can make an obsolescence adjustment. They can use the income approach, or at the very least, please change the weighting to arrive at a reasonable valuation. They've refused to implement any of these solutions, and the result is an inflated value that does not reflect what a willing buyer would pay for this property. In an open market transaction, right? That's the key. That is the standard here. So with that, I'll conclude our opening presentation and save the balance of our time for rebuttal. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. DeKessian. We will now go to the department for their presentation. They will also have 20 minutes for their presentation. If you would please introduce yourself for the record.
Yes, good morning, Chair Lieber and honorable members of the board. Thank you. My name is David Lujan. With me also is Sonia Yim, and we are both with the legal department. Also representing SAPD, we have Jack McCool with us as well. Before we address the specific issues raised in this year's petition, we'd first like to address some background. First, because this is the 5th year the petitioner has presented the same issues with essentially no new argument or information to support its reduction requests, we recommend that the board deny this year's petition as it has the previous 4 years. Second, for the current tax year at issue, petitioner added approximately $2.7 billion in new property, yet it is asking for a $3.2 billion reduction from last year's board-adopted value. Finally, as in previous years, petitioner again cites the continuous and increasing risk of catastrophic wildfires following the large wildfire events from 2017 and 2018 as the foundational basis for its value reduction request. Staff has looked at this issue each year, and while climate change and an increase in general wildfire risk continue to be real concerns, the specific risks faced by petitioner that the operation of their equipment causes a catastrophic wildfire have meaningfully decreased since 2017-2018. This has been confirmed by the credit markets and the PUC. But perhaps most importantly, petitioner itself has recognized this decline in wildfire risk, announcing in a March 2023 press release that through the execution of its wildfire mitigation plan, it has reduced the probability of catastrophic wildfires associated with its equipment by about 75 to 80%. Again, we want to be clear that we are not saying that climate change is not real, or that wildfire risks do not remain, or that things couldn't take a turn for the worse in the future. What we are pointing out is that petitioner's foundational basis for requesting significant reductions over the past 5 years has not been borne out. In fact, the specific risks facing petitioner have gotten better, not worse. By petitioner's own calculations and public statements, the probability of catastrophic wildfires associated with its equipment is reduced by 75 to 80%. Finally, we would note that we made the same wildfire-related adjustments as in previous years, the largest of which was to add an equity risk premium to their cap rate, which resulted in about a $2 billion reduction to their overall value. Overall, all wildfire adjustments taken together combined to reduce petitioner's unitary value by approximately $2.6 billion. Concerning the weighting and reconciliation, in doing its assessment, SAPD took all relevant information into account and appropriately computed and reconciled both an HCLD and an income or CEA indicator of value, considering the data available and the relative appropriateness of the approaches. Here, pursuant to property tax rules, HCLD is the most reliable value method because the HCLD indicator begins with the actual assets on which PUC allows petitioner to earn a return. It reflects the amount actually invested to put the property into service. Thus, staff weight it more heavily. Petitioner criticizes the weighting of the HCLD and the CEA because of the difference between the two values. They simply conclude, however, that this difference is economic obsolescence due to wildfire risk, and that the CEA must be given more weight because it's a lower number. But there is nothing that makes it necessarily true that any difference between HCLD and CEA is always obsolescence. In fact, it might be that HCLD is too high, but of course, it's entirely possible that the CEA is too low. While obsolescence is one potential reason for the difference between the indicators, other possible factors, including regulatory lag and spending related to businesses' decisions in the management of assets that may not be recoverable in the context of the PUC's prudency standard. Additionally, to the extent that a difference between CEA and HCLD might be due to obsolescence, as previously explained, an adjustment has already been made for obsolescence by allowing an increase to petitioner's rate of return. Thus, staff believes that all appropriate obsolescence adjustments for wildfire risk have been made. Concerning the wildfire liability, petitioner requests an approximately $689 million reduction to its board-adopted value for its lawsuit liabilities accrued on its books. This liability, however, is not deductible because it is not an ordinary expense, one that is expected to be paid to maintain or operate the property. Rather, this liability accrual stems from lawsuit settlements from 2017 to 2018 wildfires and mudslides, some of which may have been started by petitioner's equipment and damaged property owned by others. This is important because it means that these liabilities may affect the price someone would pay for the entire company, i.e. the entire business, sometimes referred to as going concern, but it does not affect the value of the taxable property. And what is being appraised is the taxable property. It is also important to point out that petitioner has applied to the PUC for recovery of these liabilities. If the PUC approves, they will recover in rates and a property tax deduction is not appropriate. If the PUC does not approve because petitioner did not meet PUC's prudency standard, it would be inappropriate to make a reduction in property tax value for property operated imprudently. This is supported by the Assessor's Handbook, the property tax rules, judicial decisions, and generally accepted appraisal practice. Petitioner states that they could not sell their property without the liabilities attached. However, even if true, it does not change the value of the asset. The liability may change the amount the purchaser pays for the business, but it does not change the value of the asset. A simple example will illustrate why this is. If we own a hotel that's worth $1 million and someone slips and falls and sues for $100,000, the building will still be worth $1 million. But the amount of money that I, as the seller, will receive from the sale will be reduced by $100,000 because of the lawsuit. But that does not reduce the price the prospective purchaser would pay for the building because it does not affect the ability to operate the building. That is essentially the situation here. Petitioner used its property, caused damage to other property owners, and must now pay damages. This liability may reduce the price a prospective purchaser might be willing to pay for the entire business, but it does not affect the price a prospective purchaser would pay for the taxable property because it does not affect the property's ability to generate income. Essentially, petitioner is asking the board to reduce its taxable value of its property for damage done to someone else's property. Petitioner's own documents admit that any expense related to this liability affects the price of the entire business, but not the taxable assets. In the EY report on which it relies, In the EY report, it states, "It is reasonable to assume that a prospective buyer would consider this expense as part of the going concern of the business operations. It does not matter when they pay out the liability, whether yesterday, today, or in the future. Payment of this lawsuit liability does not affect the CEA model because it's not an ordinary expense. It is not expected to be necessary to maintain or operate the property." Concerning the wildfire mitigation capital expenditures, in accordance with AB 1054, petitioner spent about $1.6 billion on wildfire mitigation capital expenditure for which they are allowed to earn no equity return. The statutes are clear. They prohibit petitioner from earning a return on that investment, which is reflected in the equity portion of their rate base. But petitioner is not prohibited from earning a return of its investment, which is reflected in its recovery of amounts spent, and staff made an adjustment for that. Staff removed the equity portion of the rate base that AB 1054 does not allow. Concerning the Wildfire Fund initial contribution, petitioner's initial contribution of $2.4 billion to the Wildfire Fund as required by AB 1054 is not considered an operating expense under basic appraisal theory because it is not an expected recurring cash expense. Instead, it is an amortized past accounting expense that need not be paid again. Petitioner itself identifies the initial $2.4 billion contribution as a non-core item in its annual report. Non-core items includes income or loss from discontinued operations and income or loss from significant discrete items that management does not consider representative of ongoing earnings, such as income and expense related to changes in law. This is a perfect description of this payment. In essence, petitioner acknowledges in its annual report that this amount will not be paid again, but is asking the board to treat it like it is. Although petitioner clearly admits this is a non-cash, extraordinary, amortized accounting expense, petitioner points to language in Assessor's Handbook 502 regarding prepaid insurance as supposedly supporting its position that accounting expense can be deducted. However, the Assessor's Handbook refers to anticipated and recurring prepaid amounts that represent future cash flows. They say that certain expenditures are annualized when using the direct capitalization model. The specific example given is of insurance prepaid for 3 years because there is an assumption that after 3 years, another 3 years of insurance would need to be paid. It allows annualization of a 3-year prepaid insurance amount because of the assumption that after 3 years, there will be another cash outlay. In contrast, it is undisputed that this single one-time AB 1054 initial contribution does not recur. Therefore, unlike the Assessor's Handbook example, where you get a distortion of capitalizable income if you do not annualize the prepaid insurance, here you get a distortion of income if you do annualize the initial contribution. Because it will never be paid again, it is improper to allow it as an expense and then project that onto into perpetuity, as is done in the direct capitalization model. Alternatively, petitioner argues that its $2.4 billion initial contribution to the Wildfire Fund creates some type of intangible asset that must be deducted from its valuation. However, petitioner does not provide evidence or legal or appraisal authority to explain why those expenditures create some kind of intangible asset. But perhaps more importantly, even assuming petitioner is correct, these expenditures create some kind of intangible asset, in order for that intangible asset to be deductible, it would have to be taxed in the first place. SAPD did not include any such intangibles in its valuation. They were not added to the HCLD, and there is no separate contribution of income that should be deducted from the income approach. In conclusion, SAPD has recommended all appropriate adjustments for petitioner's general and specific reductions related to wildfire, consistent with relevant authorities and petitioner's own public statements. Further, SAPD's valuation is supported by reality over the past 5 years. In 2020, petitioner requested general reductions because catastrophic wildfire risks were an existential threat to their business. AB 1054 and their own actions have mitigated much of that risk. They also requested specific adjustments for their initial contribution to the Wildfire Fund and their 2017-2018 lawsuit liabilities on the premise that such contributions and lawsuit liabilities would be recurring. However, no additional initial contribution has been required for the Wildfire Fund, and they have been able to obtain wildfire insurance for which additional costs were allowed as expenses. And the estimated life of the Wildfire Fund has extended from 10 to 15 and now 20 years. As far as the lawsuit liabilities, petitioner states in its own 10-K that any losses incurred in connection with the post-2018 wildfires will be covered by insurance recoveries through electric rates or third-party receivables, and expect that any such losses after insurance recoveries will not be material. Notably, petitioner states that this is the case even if they incur material losses in excess of the amounts accrued for each of the post-2018 wildfires. And again, we would like to emphasize that we are not saying that risk, even material risk, from wildfires does not remain or that things couldn't change overnight. What we are saying is that the specific risks facing petitioner's property have been meaningfully mitigated. Based on this trend, as recognized by the PUC, the credit markets, and petitioner itself, we have made all appropriate adjustments. For these reasons, we recommend denying the petition on all issues. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Takessian, you now have 10 minutes to make your rebuttal.
Thank you. Thank you. And if it's okay, Madam Chair, I may have some of my colleagues step in on particular issues, but if that's okay with you.
If you would just ask them to introduce themselves.
Certainly, certainly. So, there's a lot to go through here, but I think staff knows better. First of all, this business of we added $2.7 billion in new assets, and we're requesting a $3.6 billion reduction off of last year's board adopted value. Of course, our position is that last year's board adopted value was grossly inflated. So, I'm not sure what Mr. Lujan is trying to prove with that statement, but I think he knows better than that. Second, in terms of the credit markets, we've heard this last year, we heard it again this year. Let's be clear about one thing. Before the 2018 Thomas and Woolsey fires, Edison had an A- credit rating from Fitch. After the Thomas and Woolsey fires, its rating was dropped down to BBB-. That's a 3-step drop. What Mr. Lujan is referring to is that they got upgraded because of the mitigation measures that they've taken from BBB- to BBB. They're not where they were before the 2018 wildfire expenses, but of course he doesn't say that. He just gives you a part of the picture. In terms of the equity risk premium, the equity risk premium doesn't address the specific items of adjustments that we're seeking. That's an adjustment to the cap rate. It's not an adjustment to the capital expenditures. It's not an adjustment to the insurance initial contribution. It's not an adjustment reflecting the claims. And it doesn't do anything to address the significant obsolescence that the property is suffering from, and that is reflected in an $8 billion difference between the cost and income indicators. And again, he had his entire time to present an explanation for the $8 billion difference. I didn't hear one, and we haven't heard one for 5 years. All he says is he basically disagrees with the board's own handbook, that the only plausible explanation listed in the board's handbook is that the difference in value indicators is a sign of obsolescence. He says it could be regulatory lag, it could be this, it could be that. It's their appraisal, and they haven't done anything to explain it. So that's that. In terms of recovery of liabilities, I would like a Miss Andrea Wood, Vice President of Tax for Southern California Edison Company, to address that.
Certainly.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Capizzi, I appreciate that. Yeah, I would like to respond to a couple of things, and then I would like to talk about the point that the state has made about decreasing risk, because I think that's important. But just real quick, on the recovery of the claims, I know that was mentioned, and we do have proceedings where we are trying to pursue that. But I also want people to think about, you denied the accrual of the claims, you denied the payment of the claims, which is cash, but yet you're going to pick up the recovery of the claims if we're successful. So you need to think about, economically what's right there. And then the analogy around a buyer of a building, wouldn't take into account that somebody had tripped and fallen there and the liability associated with that. And I would disagree with that, because if you're going to buy a building, a shopping center, a restaurant, people trip and fall in those establishments all the time. And so if you're going to buy it, you would have to take into account the fact that the trip and fall may occur in the future, same as if wildfires were to occur in the future. That's a risk that you would assess. And then core versus non-core. I would just say that, non-core is not a GAAP concept. It's not a general accepted accounting principle concept. It's determined by the company. And really, the distinction there for us is that core activities are what you use to forecast. So they're predictable. Non-core activities are not predictable. They're unusual things that happen, but that can still affect the value of the company. For example, this wildfire risk and inverse combination, the risk goes on and on. For example, in the claims, we've accrued $9.4 billion of claims over 6 years. That's not non-recurring. And if you want to think about cash, we've made payments of $7.4 billion over 5 years, with likely more to come in the future. So again, not non-recurring. And then I will speak to the risk issue just real quick. In 2024, this is this year, there's been almost 8,000 wildfires that have burned over 1 million acres.
5 minutes remaining.
And roughly half of that is in our territory, okay? So, that shows you, while we've done mitigation efforts and they've been well planned and well executed, the risk of wildfires are still occurring, and they're not necessarily going down. The 2024 fire season was much more damaging than 2022 and 2023. And so those are real facts that occur, regardless of what statements have said and construing them to mean that the risk is going away. It's not. And I think the insurance markets would particularly support that. It's been increasingly more expensive for us to obtain wildfire insurance. In fact, in a recent decision by the CPUC, they conceded that the future cost of obtaining the $1 billion of insurance that we need to participate in the AB 1054 Wildfire Fund could cost up to 50%. So that's $1 million home, $500,000 of insurance each year to cover. And that's just, it's not allowed. And so the CPUC's conceded that. They've recognized that there are all kinds of reasons why the risks are going up and the costs are going up. And it's evidenced by the market not being able to attain insurance at reasonable prices. So I'll stop there, Marty, and give you the last few minutes.
Sure. Appreciate that. Let me see if we've got any other points to make here. I think you've heard it all for the most part. The insurance initial contribution, he says that's not a recurring expense, but what I would tell the board again, don't focus on the fact that this is an insurance initial contribution. Focus on the fact that it's an insurance payment, right? So I don't think that we should be reading the situation that narrowly. It's an insurance, it's an prepaid insurance, it's initial contribution. Whether you have to make that payment again or another form of insurance payment in the future, that's what you should be focused on. And to Ms. Wood's point about the insurance market, I mean, no real response to that, right? So these are the most sophisticated, companies in terms of actuarial studies and in terms of gauging risk, and for good reason, because they're going to be the ones liable to pay that risk. So staff can sit there and say, well, you know what, Fitch upgraded Edison from BBB minus to BBB, and therefore everything's okay. It's not okay. And so just look to the people who are the most financially self-interested, which would be, the insurance companies, right? Look at that market. There isn't a meaningful response coming from staff on that, because that completely belies their entire position, that this is somehow a risk that is now manageable or going away or reduced to the extent that a willing buyer wouldn't consider it. And I guess just in conclusion, I would bring us back to the willing buyer concept. Put yourself in the shoes of someone that's going to come and buy these assets, right? Are you going to be concerned about wildfire risk? Are you going to be concerned about regulatory non-recovery on expenditures you have to make? Of course, the answer is yes, right? This isn't a hotel where someone slips and falls because somebody didn't properly dry the floor after cleaning it. This is strict liability, right? These assets cause the liability, right? It's not whether Edison did anything to cause it. It's any causal link between the property and the ignition of a fire, and the owner of the property is liable for it. It's sort of like owning a dog that is ill-tempered or vicious, right? Versus a dog that's well-behaved. In both cases, the law says that the owner is strictly liable for the damage caused by that asset. That's the concept of strict liability. Obviously, different factual situations, but if we're trying to get into the world of torts, as staff is trying to do, then that would be a more appropriate analogy, right? Where something is something inherent to the condition of the property that causes this sort of damage, right? That's a more appropriate way of looking at this. And if you know that no matter how well you maintain this property, no matter what mitigation efforts you've taken, that you're going to be on the hook for this, of course a willing buyer would take that into account. How could staff say otherwise? Anybody in this room that were buying these assets would consider this backdrop in whether to buy the property. And that gets back to the full cash value concept, right? And fair market
Time's
value.
expired.
Thank you, Mr. DeCassian. Members, do you have any questions for the petitioner, the department, or the appeals attorney? Mr. Vasquez.
My question is with the department first. The petitioner has long argued that the burden of proof is really on the board to prove and reconcile the material differences between the value and indicators. They say it's not up to them and that the burden proof standard falls back on the department. Are there any cases, anything in the books where the burden of proof fell on the department to support the conclusion?
No, we are not aware of that.
Okay. And yeah, I think you mentioned in your opening remarks that nothing's changed in terms of the evidence. I mean, this has been going on, like you mentioned, 5 years now.
Yes.
Same situation.
Yeah, these are essentially the same arguments over 5 years, yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Gaines.
May I respond to that last point?
No, excuse me. The question was for the department. I'm sorry. Mr. Gaines.
I'd like to just ask a question of Mr. DeCassian in terms of the valuation aspect, because if you take a look at an entity with a declining Fitch rating financially, right? So it was an A- rated company. It's now a BBB. Doesn't that indicate a decline in value?
Well, to us, it does. Now, staff will, I think we need to distinguish the value of the enterprise from the value of the property. But since staff's the one raising the credit ratings, and I think it's a fair rebuttal, Mr. Gaines, that what you're saying is in fact true. If they're using the credit rating increase to try to demonstrate some sort of increase in value or that a reduction is inappropriate, then I think it's fair game to point out the contrary. And I would say, also just, if I may, just to respond, we're not saying that the burden of proof, by the way, is on the board. We're not saying that. We're saying that we have evidence to show that the disparity in value indicators is due to economic obsolescence, and that evidence is your own handbook, and staff doesn't have any countervailing evidence. So I don't want anybody in this room to confuse or to say that we're just putting it back on the board. That's not what we're doing.
Great, thank you. I'd like to ask staff this question on the rating. Because you're really indicating that things are improved, that the risk is reduced. And I just don't see that in terms of it's really an insurance exposure in California. And our market the insurance market is still in disarray. I think there are elements that are going to be put in place that will mitigate some of the risk, but the risk continues. It's just a matter of figuring out how do we fund it to make sure that there is enough premium and basically capital available for future claims. But yeah, I'd like to just hear your response in terms of the rating and how that, because in my view, that affects, I mean, from a market standpoint, that affects value, in my view. It's like, why would I invest in a triple B rated company when I can invest in an A rated company?
Well, I think Mr. Dicasian's correct when he said that has to do more with the going concern value of the entire business, whereas our task is to look at the property value and not the entire business.
Okay, but it has to do with the expense as it relates to an insurance payment.
Yeah, so to the extent that we brought up the credit ratings, we just think that's an indication, external indications of where the risk is going. When Fitch made that upgrade, they pointed to cumulative structures being destroyed by petitioner declined more than 90% over those years. They point to petitioner-linked wildfires being significantly smaller. And exposures in terms of third-party liabilities, much more manageable. And then they also noted petitioners' ongoing efforts to enhance wildfire resilience, along with local efforts, credit supportive elements of AB 1054. They all contribute to the rating increase. And again, that rating increase is a reflection of the general risks facing the business. So we're not saying that the credit rating is the reason for the property valuation, but we think it's an indicator, again, a third-party independent group taking a look at risk and seeing which direction it's going.
Okay, but isn't the argument over non-producing assets and whether they should be charged a tax or not?
Yeah, so I would say a couple things to that. One, I think you commented earlier about there being still some risk, and we acknowledge that there's still risk. That's why we made the obsolescence adjustment, 0.85% to the risk premium. That was a risk premium adjustment that was actually requested by petitioner coming out of the 2017-2018 wildfires. And it's something that staff is looking at each year. But with things getting better, it'd be interesting to take a look at what's going on with the risk premium.
Okay, great. I'd like a comment, if I could, from Mr. Dicasian in terms of the factor that's been applied for a reduction in value, the 0.85.
And thanks, Board Member Gaines. That doesn't go to the specific adjustments we've been requesting. That goes to the cap rate, and that concerns adjustments. That's an adjustment with respect to future wildfire risk, but it doesn't go to the specific adjustments. And I have to say, Mr. Lujan mentioned the Fitch credit rating in his opening. He mentioned it in the middle of his presentation, and he closed with it. So for him to now sit before us and say, well, gee, it doesn't really matter, and we're just citing it for overall risk, when I point out that we're not back at the A- level pre-2017 to 2018, that's really not fair. But I would say that there is a fine line here, right? We're not looking at individual assets. We're looking at the assets themselves as a going concern, right? You need to take out the enterprise, like the things that accrued to the business versus the things that accrued to the property. But you're looking at, this is a unitary valuation. You're looking at the network of property as a whole versus assets here and there. So I don't know if that sheds any further light on any of this, but I do think that if staff's going to say that, the Fitch credit rating shows that there's been an improvement, and then we point out that it's not close to A-, which is what it was before, the Thomas and Woolsey fires, then, I think that that's a fair point for us to make.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you. Controller Kahn.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My first questions are for the staff, BoE staff. Could you please come back? Sorry. I was wondering if you could ask the parties to explain whether the money spent on the wildfire mitigation capital expenditures has any value that should be reflected in property tax valuation calculations.
Well, fundamentally, when we look at the, you're talking about the wildfire mitigation capital expenditure?
Yes.
You've bought property, and that
Right.
property's been installed on the system, and we have a mandate to tax property. I think there's some arguments about whether they can earn a return on it or not, and we've made an appropriate adjustment for that. We've removed the return on portion. They did get a return of their investment through a securitization procedure, and we calculated that, and that's what we find in HCLD.
So it should be reflected.
It is reflected
It is
in the
reflected.
HCLD, yes.
All right. Are there any other utility companies that have made this petition or making these claims?
No, I couldn't really comment on that. I can't comment on what other petitions are happening with other companies.
I'm just wondering if there's some sort of a trend that we're seeing.
Not to my knowledge.
Thank you. Okay, appreciate that. Mr. DeCassian, thank you for your presentation today, you and your team. In regards to your argument outlining wildfire risks, do you contest that the CPUC's final conclusion finding that the passage of AB 1054 and other investor supportive policies in California have mitigated wildfire exposure faced by California utilities?
I think that the answer is the risk could be mitigated somewhat, but it's still significant. And Controller Cohn, nice to see you again. I would just say that look to what the insurance markets are doing. Look to what people are doing that are going to underwrite this risk. How much weight do they give a CPUC determination or a finding? So the insurance market is in such disarray in California right now that the insurance regulators needed to step in to try and bring the fire insurance carriers back into the state of California. To me, that's much more relevant in terms of Edison's ongoing wildfire risk than a determination that the risk has been mitigated due to capital expenditures and grid hardening and things of that nature. And what I would say on that point is, I think when staff says that, these assets are in the system, I think that we're conflating two different types of valuation approaches. Remember, historical cost in some ways, in my view, is a misnomer, right? Because it's only looking at cost to the extent that those assets generate income, right? It's a way of measuring the earning power of the utility. And if an asset's not earning income and generating income, then it needs to be excluded, right? That's really the key. It's not like another type of like replacement cost or reproduction cost where you're looking at it just sort of to see what it costs to reproduce that property or to replace the property. You're looking at net book value only to determine the earning power of the utility in a regulated environment. If it's not earning, which it is undisputable that it's not in this case, then it needs to be removed. And there's no return of or recovery of, which in regulatory parlance means you have it on your books and you can depreciate it for rate-making purposes. We don't have that situation here. So it needs to be taken out entirely. So you asked me a discrete question. I went a little broader. So thank you for indulging.
No problem. I do have a follow-up question. How many utility companies are in the state of California? Do you know?
I don't know offhand.
I don't either, but I would imagine there's more than one. I'm curious why we always hear from Edison, and where are the others? And for what? And now you have license to go be speculative and share with me some of your thoughts on what you're seeing from your vantage point.
Allowing me to speculate is dangerous, Controller Cohen. I don't want to speculate. All I know is that this is an issue that affects Edison's ratepayers. I'm not sure of what the impact of these discrete issues are on the property tax value of, for instance, PG&E or Sempra. I can't speak to that. Mm-hmm. But what I do know is that this is an important issue that impacts Edison and its ratepayers, and that's why we're here for 5 years in a row.
Yeah.
Because it matters not just to the company, but to the ratepayers.
One last question, and I'll let you go. Hasn't the utility itself recognized a significant reduction to its risk as stated in the press release?
Yes, I mean, I think, I think we addressed that with Ms. Wood's comments, but Ms. Wood, if you would like to come back online to, with Controller Cohen's permission, is that
Yes.
okay?
Yeah, that's, Madam Chair.
Certainly.
Hello, Ms. Cohen. How are
Hi.
you?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Would you
Yeah,
would you like me to repeat the question?
no, I think I get the gist of it. I mean, I realize that there are statements, public statements, that talk about our mitigation plans and how we've executed on those plans. I do think that does reduce the risk. I mean, that involves things like covered conductors, replacing wooden poles with concrete poles or wooden poles with fire retardant, more extreme vegetation management. Those are some things that we can do to keep our our equipment from causing fires. But the fact is that the climate here in California and weather-induced risks, it could create fires that, everything that we've done could have mitigated some things, but things still happen and fires still exist. Like the statistics I went over, the 2024 fires alone, they outmatched 2023 and 2022. So the fires aren't going away. They're still here. AB 1054, the insurance fund, does help. But you do have to have, in the back of your mind that there could be a catastrophic wildfire, like there have been in the past, that could deplete the fund. So we don't think the risk, well, first of all, in the earlier years, we don't think that the risk was quantified properly at all. And then going forward, it might have decreased from maybe those first years, but it's not gone away. And the 85 basis points is not sufficient to cover the risk. And, kind of going back to the core versus non-core, core things are things we can depend on, that we can forecast, that we know are going to happen. And that helps us understand, the cash flows of our business. Non-core things are things that are hard to predict. They still impact our business and they still impact cash flow, but they're hard to predict. And a willing buyer, willing seller, can put together a model that models out the core activities, but it can't necessarily identify what might occur in the future that's non-core. And so what they do is they risk adjust it. So they say, okay, well, here's your cash flow from the core activities. And oh, by the way, I know all these things are happening in California: inverse condemnation, climate change, past catastrophic wildfires. And there would have to be a risk adjustment on that potential earnings and potential cash in order to determine what a willing buyer might pay.
Thank you. Just to answer my own question about how many utilities companies are in the state of California, there are more than 40 publicly owned. And I can't get my hands on the number of how many privately investor-owned utility companies there are, but we can say that there are many. I just am trying to understand why we only hear from one on a continual basis for the last 5 years. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Schaefer, any questions, please?
To staff, we have, was told there was 2,000 exhibits you have here today, and we're going to be using our desktop here to review some. Is that so?
I don't think we need to look at those.
But it's your exhibits, right?
Yes, well, actually, just to be clear, we were asked what items might be introduced as exhibits, and so that's the list that we gave, and I think they were prepared sort of for administrative convenience so that you could see them in case they were pointed to.
Well, I figured it out. If I spent 30 minutes or 30 seconds looking at each exhibit, I would be here 8 days. But,
Well, I promise to take that into consideration the next time we submit exhibits.
we have a California law that limits memorandums in opposition to 10 pages unless you get leave of court. We're not responding here. We're the moving party a lot of the times. But I would think, fewer is better. And if I had the rulemaking power, I would limit our exhibits to 200 instead of 2,000. I think we'd save a lot of trees that way.
And let's hear from Ms. Himovitz.
Hi, excuse me, good morning. Julia Himovitz on behalf of the legal department. Your comment is taken. However, this is not the same as a regular court, so those rules don't necessarily apply here. But I would also note that to save trees, that is being provided to you electronically. So although we're not referencing them now. So thank you.
Just less sometimes is better. I mean, Jerry Brown taught us that.
That is noted. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schaefer. Now, members, the recommended motion is to deny the petition by Southern California Edison. Do we have a motion to that effect? Anyone who'd like to make that motion? If not, I'll go ahead and make the motion. And is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Schaefer. In terms of public comment, we do not have any written comments, nor anyone who has submitted a comment card from the auditorium. So we'll go to our AT&T moderator for comments on this item. Moderator, if you please let us know if there's anyone on the telephone line who would like to make a public comment regarding item 2.
If you would like to make a comment, please press 1, then 0. And at this time, there are no comments.
Thank you. Members, do you have any further discussion on the item? Seeing none, we'll go ahead to state that I have made a motion to deny the petition by Southern California Edison. That was seconded by Mr. Schaefer. Ms. Cicchetti, if you would please call the roll.
Ready? Chair Lieber?
Aye.
Vice Chair Gaines?
No?
Member Vasquez?
Aye.
Member Schaefer?
Aye.
Controller Cohen?
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay, members, the motion passes with 4 votes. Thank you very much, members, for hanging in here. It is now 11:30, and we will take our 10-minute break, and we will reconvene at 11:40.
Good morning, members. Chair Lieber.
Here. We'll go on now to our tax program matters. And before we begin the next section, Ms. Himovitz from the legal department will make a statement regarding the adjudicatory matters.
Good morning again, Julia Himovitz on behalf of the legal department. I want to make note that today's matters 3 through 6 are non-appearance adjudicatory matters. Thus, the parties will not be appearing today. The petitioners have requested that you make your decision based on the written record provided so that they can maintain their confidentiality. The appeals attorney is limited in answering any substantive questions, and therefore any questions you should have should be limited to procedural matters only. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, we'll go on to item 3, SFPP LP. This is a property tax appeal, non-appearance adjudicatory matter. No parties are required to appear. Contribution disclosure forms are required under Government Code Section 15626. The Chief of Board Proceedings has not received completed contribution disclosure forms from all parties, agents, and participants for this matter. All board members indicated that their records disclose no disqualifying contributions from these taxpayers, parties, their agents, or participants. The Chief of Board Proceedings provided the board member offices with an ex parte memorandum listing all the parties, agents, and participants to ensure that there were no ex parte violations, and no violations have been disclosed. Ms. Wilkman, the appeals attorney, is presenting this matter. Please proceed.
Good morning again, Chair Lieber and honorable members of the board. As stated, I am Sarah Wilkman, the appeals attorney assigned to the 2024 petition for SFPP LP. In this case, the parties have waived their appearances before the board and have asked for a decision based on the confidential written record. The submitted petition has one issue in contention based on the written record and as reflected in greater detail within the appeals attorney's summary decision. I am recommending that the board deny the petition and adopt the written findings and decisions therein, and I ask for the board's adoption of the appeals attorney's recommendation.
Thank you. Members, the recommended motion is to deny the petition for reassessment of the 2024 unitary value as submitted by SFPP LP. Is there a motion to that effect?
Just a question first. then I'll
Mr.
make-
Vasquez, question.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the presentation, Ms. Wilkman. But, I've just been seeing a lot of these petitions arguing this underutilization or economic obsolescence, I guess, is what's coming up every time due to the state's push for zero emissions on this. Is this something that we're having a problem in terms of the actual data capturing this thing, or, because we can't get into the case, right, because they're not here.
Correct.
So more of a general question, I guess I'm trying to, without getting in trouble here.
Certainly, each year, the conditions and sort of regulatory environment, policies that may affect the petitioner are considered each year in the state assessment process. And so what we do is look at things fresh each year, and I say we collectively, but I really mean the State Assessed Properties Division does look at conditions each year, and when the data bears out an adjustment, they do make adjustments.
Thank you. I'll move the item if you need to move.
Mr. Vasquez moves, and is there a second to the motion? Mr. Schaefer seconds the motion to deny the petition. We do not have any written comments, nor anyone from the auditorium who has submitted a comment card. Therefore, let's go to our AT&T moderator. Moderator, if you would please let us know if there's anyone on the line who would like to make a public comment regarding item 3.
If you would like to make a comment, please press 1, then 0. And at this time, there are no comments.
Thank you, moderator. Members, is there any further discussion of this one? Seeing none, Mr. Vasquez has moved and Mr. Schaefer has seconded that we deny the petition for reassessment submitted by SFPP Limited Partnership. Mr. Cuddy, if you would please call the roll.
Chair Lieber.
Aye.
Vice Chair Gaines.
Aye.
Member Vasquez.
Aye.
Member Schaefer.
Aye.
Controller Cohen.
Aye.
Okay, thank you, members. That motion passes unanimously, and we'll go on to item 4, which is, and I hope I'm pronouncing this right, CalNev Pipeline LLC. This is a property tax appeal, non-appearance adjudicatory. No parties are required to appear. Contribution disclosure forms are required under Government Code Section 15626. The Chief of Board Proceedings has not received completed contribution disclosure forms from all parties, agents, and participants for this matter. All board members indicated that their records disclose no disqualifying contributions from these taxpayers, parties, their agents, or participants. The Chief of Board Proceedings provided board member offices with an ex parte memorandum listing all parties, agents, and participants to ensure that there were no ex parte violations. No violations have been disclosed. And again, Ms. Wilkman will present on this item.
Thank you, Chair Lieber and honorable members of the board. Again, my name is Sarah Wilkman for the record, and I was the appeals attorney assigned to the 2024 petition for CalNev Pipeline LLC. Similarly, in this case, the parties have waived their appearances before the board and have asked for a decision based on the confidential written record. The submitted petition has one issue in contention. Based on the written record and as reflected in greater detail within the appeals attorney's summary decision, I am recommending that the board deny the petition and adopt the written findings and decision therein. I ask for your adoption of the appeals attorney's recommendation.
Thank you. Mr. Schaefer.
We're on number 4 here. My staff finds the appeals attorney is recommending denial because there was not a presentation of legal authority or evidence. Are you sure there wasn't some arguably legal authority and evidence that we just didn't buy? I mean, if they're not presenting legal authority or evidence, it might rise to the level of a frivolous filing, and we want to discourage that.
Member Schaefer, it is the petitioner's burden of proof to show that the respondent erred or essentially illegally assessed the petitioner to some extent. And so if sufficient evidence is characterized as not being presented, it's that they did not meet their burden of proof.
I see. But we do have something similar to Rule 11. If there's something is filed for intention of harassment or delay, we can express our opinion on that too. We don't have that in this item, but That comes to mind when I see that there is no evidence or no legal authority presented. As I expect legal authority to be argued. Whether it wins or not is our decision. And I expect there to be some evidence or they wouldn't even be coming before us. Thank you.
Okay. Now, members, the recommended motion is to deny the petition submitted by CalNav Pipeline LLC. Mr. Vasquez moves. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Schaefer. Okay. We do not have any written comments nor anyone in the auditorium who has indicated that they wish to make a public comment on this agenda item. So we'll go to our AT&T moderator. Moderator, if you would please let us know if there's anyone who would like to make a comment on item 4.
If you'd like to make a comment, please press 1, then 0. And at this time, there are no comments.
Thank you. Members, is there any further discussion? Seeing none, Mr. Vasquez has moved and Mr. Schaefer has seconded that we deny the petition for reassessment of 2024 unitary value submitted by CalNav Pipeline LLC. And Mr. Keddy, if you would please call the roll.
Chair Lieber.
Aye.
Vice Chair Gaines.
Aye.
Member Vasquez.
Aye.
Member Schaefer.
Aye.
Controller Cohen.
Aye.
Thank you, members. That motion passes unanimously. And we'll go on to item 5, BNSF Railway Company, property tax appeal, non-appearance adjudicatory. Again, no parties are required to appear. Contribution disclosure forms are required under Government Code Section 15626. The Chief of Board Proceedings Division has not received completed contribution disclosure forms from all parties, agents, and participants for this matter. All board members indicated that the records disclose no disqualifying contribution from these taxpayers, parties, their agents, or participants. Excuse me, we're just in the middle of introducing the item, and then I'll come straight back to you. The Chief of Board Proceedings provided the member offices with an ex parte memorandum listing all parties, agents, and participants to ensure there were no ex parte violations. No violations have been disclosed, and we will have Mr. Younger, our appeals attorney, present this matter. Mr. Schaefer, did you have a pre-question?
Well, I have an investment in SRH Total Return Fund, which has 34% of its billion-dollar portfolio in Berkshire Hathaway, which happens to own BNSF Railroad. Now, I don't think that my 1,000 shares exceeds $1,000 in interest. You know, it's probably a matter of pennies, but I am putting it on the record. And am I right that I don't have to just recuse myself if my interest is de minimis?
Well, let us have staff from the legal department answer that. And perhaps.
Madam Chair, legal counsel will respond to the question. Speak to the mic. Thank you, dear.
Yvette Stowers, Executive Director. Legal counsel will respond to the question, but I would like for Mr. Gaines to speak first because he has a similar comment.
Yes. So I'm not going to participate in this vote. I have a conflict of interest, and so I will be exiting the dais.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Gaines. And Ms. Himovitz.
Good afternoon. Julie Hemvitz on behalf of the legal department. It's recommended that you not participate in the vote, but it is certainly up to you if you wish to participate. I can't speak to the specifics of your investments, but if you feel that it would be improper, you may also not participate.
Well, I will participate, but it's on the basis that my interest is de minimis.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We'll go now to Mr. Younger's presentation.
Good afternoon, Chair Lieber and honorable members. I am Christian Younger, the appeals attorney assigned to the 2024 petition for reassessment filed by BNSF Railway Company. The parties have waived their appearance before the board and have asked for a decision based on the confidential written record. The submitted petition raised one issue, which is detailed in the summary decision. Based on the written record and as reflected in greater detail within the appeals attorney's summary decision, I am recommending the board deny the petition and adopt the written findings and decision therein. Further, based on the unitary values asserted in this petition, this appeal is subject to Revenue and Taxation Code Section 40. So after the board decides on the petition today, the appeals attorney will prepare a decision in early 2025 to summarize the board's action and for transparency to the public. So with that, I ask for your adoption of the appeals attorney's recommendation.
Okay, seeing no further questions, members, the recommended motion is to deny the petition for reassessment of the 2024 unitary value submitted by BNSF Railway Company. And I'll go ahead and make that motion. And Mr. Vasquez, are you seconding? Okay. And members, we have no public comment in written form, nor anyone in the auditorium who has submitted a speaker card. So we'll go to the AT&T moderator. Moderator, if you would please let us know if there's anyone on the telephone line who would like to make a public comment regarding item 5.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, to initiate public comment, please press 1 followed by 0 at this time. 1 followed by 0. And Madam Chair, nobody is queuing up.
Okay, thank you. Members, any further discussion? Seeing none, I have made a motion, and Mr. Vasquez has seconded, to deny the petition for reassessment of the 2024 unitary value submitted by BNSF Railway Company. And Mr. Keddy, if you would please call the roll.
Chair Lieber?
Aye.
Vice Chair Gaines is not participating. Member Vasquez?
Aye.
Member Schaefer?
Aye.
Controller Cone?
Aye.
Okay, members, the motion carries with 4 votes in favor. Thank you so much. And we'll go on to item 6, Central Oregon and Pacific Railroad property tax appeal, non-appearance adjudicatory. Again, no parties are required to appear. Again, contribution disclosure forms are required under Government Code Section 15626. The Chief of Board Proceedings has not received completed contribution disclosure forms from all parties, agents, and participants for this matter. All board members indicated that their records disclose no disqualifying contributions from these taxpayers, parties, their agents, or participants. Additionally, the Chief of Board Proceedings provided the board member offices with an ex parte memorandum listing all parties, agents, and participants to ensure there were no ex parte violations and no violations have been disclosed. This matter will also be presented by Mr. Younger. Please.
Thank you, Chair Lieber. Should I be waiting for Vice Chair Gaines before proceeding?
Hopefully he's monitoring things and
Okay.
he'll come back in time.
Just check.
Thank you.
I am the appeals attorney assigned to the 2024 petition for Central Oregon and Pacific Railroad. The parties have waived their appearance before the board and have asked for a decision based on the confidential written record. The submitted petition has no issues in contention, as the parties have agreed to the recommendation being presented for the board's consideration. Based on the written record, the appeals attorney recommends that the board adopt the agreed-to recommendation of the parties. With that, I ask for your adoption of the appeals attorney's recommendation.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Schaefer.
I would so move that we adopt it.
Okay. Moved by Mr. Schaefer, seconded by Mr. Vasquez. And the motion is to approve staff's recommendation in the matter affecting Central Oregon and Pacific Railroad. We do not have any written comments, and no one in the auditorium has indicated that they wish to make a public comment on this agenda item. So we'll go to our AT&T moderator. Moderator, if you please let us know if there's anyone on the line who would like to make a public comment regarding item 6.
Thank you. Again, if you would like to make public comment on item 6, please press 10 at this time. 1 followed by 0. And Madam Chair, nobody is queuing up.
Thank you, moderator. Members, is there any discussion on this item? Seeing none, Mr. Schaefer has made a motion to approve the staff recommendation with Mr. Vasquez seconding. Mr. Cicchetti, if you would please call the roll.
Chair Lieber.
Aye.
Vice Chair Gaines.
Aye.
Member Vasquez.
Aye.
Member Schaefer.
Aye.
Controller Cohen.
Aye.
Okay, thank you, members. The motion passes unanimously. And we'll go on to item 7, United Telecom Group, LLC. This matter is constitutional function. Contribution disclosure forms are not required pursuant to Government Code Section 15626. The Chief of Board Proceedings provided the board member offices with an ex parte memorandum listing all parties, agents, and participants to ensure that there were no ex parte violations, and no violations have been disclosed. Mr. McCool will present on this item. Thank you.
Thank you, and good afternoon, Chair Lieber and honorable members of the board. My name is Jack McCool, Chief of the State Assessed Properties Division. The State Assessed Properties Division performs routine audits of state assessees under the authority of the California Revenue and Taxation Code Section 828 and Government Code Section 15618. The purpose of a property tax audit is to determine the accuracy, completeness, and reliability of the financial data furnished by state assessees and used by the board in the valuation process. Audits also include an internal review of the methods, calculations, and assumptions used by the State Assessed Properties Division. Before you today for your consideration is one property tax audit completed by State Assessed Properties Division staff. The assessee was provided with a copy of the audit report and was given a 30-day window to provide additional information in response to the audit report. This particular assessee did not provide any additional information in the response to our audit findings. Upon adoption of the audit, the assessee will receive official notice of their value change and are provided 50 days in which they may file an appeal. I am available to answer questions if needed, and I ask for your adoption of the audit for Utility Telecom Group, LLC. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, are there any questions for Mr. McCool? Seeing none, the recommended motion is to approve the staff recommendation for the audit findings for Utility Telecom Group, LLC. Mr. Vasquez moves. Mr. Schaefer seconds. And we do not have any written comments, nor anyone in the auditorium who's submitted a speaker card. So we'll go to the AT&T moderator. Moderator, if you would let us know if there's anyone holding on the line who would like to make a public comment regarding item 7.
To make public comment on item 7, please press 10. And Madam Chair, nobody is queuing up.
Thank you. Members, is there any further discussion? Seeing none, Mr. Vasquez has moved the staff recommendation, seconded by Mr. Schaefer. And Ms. Cicchetti, if you would please call the roll.
Chair Lieber.
Aye.
Vice Chair Gaines.
Aye.
Member Vasquez.
Aye.
Member Schaefer. Controller Cohen.
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, members, the motion passes unanimously. And we will go on now to item 8, which is part of our chief counsel matters. Number 8 is organization of the board. And Ms. Himovitz will present and facilitate on this item.
Good afternoon, honorable members. Julia Himovitz on behalf of the legal department. For this item, I will be facilitating the election of the board chair and vice chair for the upcoming term. This will be a member-to-member discussion where each member may choose to nominate a chair and vice chair to serve. We're going to begin with the nominations for board chair, and then we'll complete the same process for vice chair. Any member may nominate themselves or another member for chair, and once all nominations have been made, each nominee will have 3 minutes to make a statement if they wish. I will then turn it back to Ms. Cicchetti, and she will call the roll. Please respond by stating the name of the member that you're voting for to serve as chair, or abstain from voting if you so choose. If a member receives the requisite votes, that member will be elected as chair. If no candidate receives the required votes, the board may discuss whether to reconsider any or all nominations, but in the event of a tie for either or both positions, the 2025 chair or vice chair will continue to remain the same as it is this year. So I'm going to now open the nominations for the election of the chair for the 2025 term.
Mr. Schaefer.
I'd like to place a nomination, Ted Gaines for chair. I would like to state that we have sort of a new policy of having a chair continue into a second term, and maybe to not do that might suggest some unhappiness with the chair, but that's not the case here. I'm very impressed with Chair Lieber and her service, and would normally be advocating her election, but it's important to me that our job be considered nonpartisan. Like if I was on the Public Utilities Commission or the Board of Regents or some other state facility, those are all nonpartisan, yet we are elected as Democrats and Republicans. And it's very difficult for a Republican to be taken seriously in a Democratic stronghold administration. That really should not affect the Board of Equalization. Mr. Gaines is our only Republican. He has being termed out in 2 years. I don't think we would elevate him to be our chair in 2 years from now, because that would be an election year, and there'd be a lot of criticism of the Democrats voting to empower a Republican during an election year. Next year, the coming year, is a non-election year. It, I think, is really his last opportunity to be able, during his 8 years of wonderful service to the public, to serve 1 year as chair. Thus, I would nominate, given all those circumstances, it's part of my quest in having us be considered nonpartisan in our outlook at how we do business. I would nominate Vice Chair Gaines, who is experienced as vice chair, to serve for the coming year and only the coming year as chair.
Thank you.
Others, Controller Cohen.
Thank you very much. This is one of the rare occasions when I quite possibly in agreement with Mr. Schaefer.
Pardon me?
Exactly. Exactly. Okay. I'll second that nomination. I am in agreement that Ted Gaines has demonstrated class. He's been thoughtful. He's been an active participant. He's been incredibly knowledgeable on the issues, and I think he has earned a right to be chair of this body.
Thank you so much. So I just want to make clear there are no seconds needed on that, but I will make note that you have nominated Member Gaines.
Okay. Mr. Vasquez.
I was actually going to nominate the chair, Ms. Lear, but I don't know if she's interested in going a second year. I always thought whoever was the chair should at least have 2 years. I don't know what your feeling is moving forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm willing to serve, and
I will move you.
Thank you.
So, Member Vasquez, you're nominating Ms. Lieber.
Chair Lieber.
Sure. Member Gaines?
Well, I'd be in support of the nominations that have been made for me, so I appreciate that. Yeah, I'd love to serve. I'd love the opportunity, and if there's an appropriate time to speak, I'd like to do that.
There will be a time for the nominated members to speak once we have all of the nominations in.
Right.
Would you like to nominate yourself, or are you choosing to not nominate anyone, or?
I don't know what the protocol is.
So-
I've had two individuals nominate me.
Sure,
I
yes.
would like to serve in that capacity.
Okay, so you're welcome to not name anyone at this time, and then once we have all of the nominations, we'll allow the members who have received those nominations to make a statement, and then
Okay.
Ms. Cicchetti will call the roll where each member will name the person they wish to serve.
Great, wonderful.
Thank you. Chair Lieber?
I am honored to have a nomination for the office, and I'll hold my comments until the appropriate time.
Okay, so are you nominating yourself or choosing not to nominate at this time?
I will hold off on nominating
Okay.
at this time.
Thank you. So we currently have two nominations for Member Gaines to serve and a nomination for Chair Lieber to serve. So at this time, we'll allow for approximately 3 minutes for each member who's been nominated to make a brief statement, and then Ms. Cicchetti will call the roll for your vote. So we'll start with Chair Lieber.
Okay, thank you. Well, I've been very honored to serve as chair this year. I think that we've been able to make a lot of improvements as a board and to really improve our relationship with the legislature and also with our administration. I didn't anticipate running for chair again this year, but our circumstances as a state have really changed in a material way, having a profound impact on our fiscal outlook for the coming year. And so for that reason, I'm accepting the nomination as chair and am honored to have that nomination. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll go ahead to Member Gaines.
Yes, I'd like to thank Member Schaefer and Controller Cohen for their support, and I'd like to just take a moment to speak about my vision for the BoE. First of all, I'd like to commend my fellow board members and all the BoE staff for the job that they have done over the last several years and to rehabilitate the BoE and restore the integrity and reputation of the entity. We perform important work here, and it's important that taxpayers know that the BoE is employing the highest degree of professionalism in our actions. We have done that with the BoE 2.0, as we call it. And I think we are living up to the high standards of government and public service. Because of that, I'd like to see the BoE do even more. Under my leadership, I would encourage the BoE to reclaim some of its prior authority, particularly in hearing some of the smaller appeals in our former sales and use tax areas. I think this is a very important area and appropriate for elected individuals to review these cases. A lot of these are small business owners that simply are wearing several hats and maybe missing a deadline, or there could be something that's happening personally within their lives that is preventing them from paying their taxes in a timely manner. Historically, when we did have this authority, taxpayers won about 10% of the appeal cases heard by the BoE. A lot of these things are very clear in statute, and we don't have flexibility, but there was that historical 10% that we were provided leeway as members of the BoE to help out taxpayers. At the OTA, I was tracking it initially, but a taxpayer hardly ever wins at the OTA. And I just feel that if we had electeds making those decisions, we probably would have a better understanding and a better ability to relate to what's happening to constituents in our districts. The BoE provided a better, fairer experience for taxpayers, and California citizens need a more responsive government to help them thrive here. I would commit to working with the legislature to reclaim that authority for the board. I would also commit to working with our legislative colleagues to reform Prop 19 to ensure the harmful provisions are stripped out.
Time's expired.
And would love to have your support. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm now going to turn it over to Ms. Cicchetti to call roll. When she says your name, please state the name of the member that you wish to serve as chair.
All right, before we go out for the roll, I'm going to go get a public comment on this item. AT&T moderator, could you let me know if there's anyone on the line who'd like to make a public comment on the vote of the chair of the board?
If you would like to make public comment on the vote, please press 1 followed by 0.
I would just like to state that I don't think it's appropriate to invite the public to tell us who's going to hold the gavel next year, but go ahead.
Thank you for your comment.
And nobody has queued up. Thank you.
Thank you, moderator. All right. We will now proceed to the vote. Members, when I call your name, please name the person that you select for the chair of the board. Chair Lieber?
Lieber.
Vice Chair Gaines?
Gaines?
Member Vasquez?
Chair Lieber.
Member Schaefer?
Gaines.
Controller Cohen?
Gaines.
Excuse me. So, Member Gaines, congratulations. You've been elected to serve as chair at the beginning, as chair of the board beginning at the close of this meeting. So Chair Lieber will continue to run this meeting and you will step in at the end.
May I comment through the chair?
Yes, please.
Yes. I want to thank Chair Lieber for your great leadership this year, and want to thank the board for their support, the ability for me to serve as chair. I just want to serve 1 year. I really appreciate the opportunity to do that, and looking forward to 2025. So thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. So now we will open the nominations for board vice chair. We'll go through the same process that we did for the voting for chair. And so at this time, I'm going to call for nominations for vice chair. I'll go in the same order that we did last time. So I'll start with Member Schaefer.
Vice chair.
Who would you like to nominate for vice chair?
I would nominate myself for vice chair.
Controller Cohen.
I have no nomination at the time.
Thank you. Chair Lieber.
I'll nominate Lieber.
Member Gaines.
I would nominate Mike Schaefer.
Member Vasquez.
Who's on right now? We have, choice right now is between Schaefer and Lieber.
So right now, we're just calling for nominations. These aren't actually votes, but the, sure.
Schaefer and Lieber.
Member Schaefer and Member Lieber have both been nominated at this time.
He has no nomination.
Oh, you have none. I'm sorry. I apologize. Thank you. So at this time, I will call upon Member Schaefer and Member Lieber to make brief statements. Member Schaefer, would you like to start first?
I would vote for myself.
Sure. Would you like to make a statement as to why you would like to be the vice chair?
I would like to be vice chair, but I think if we have a tie, then Gaines would be both chair and vice chair. We can't have that.
So at this time, we're just asking if you'd like to make a statement. We haven't yet voted. The members haven't yet voted, just provided nominations.
Well, I'm for brevity. I think I've said all I need to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Chair Lieber.
Thank you. Well, it's an honor to be considered for this, and it's just an honor to be a member of the board and to have the opportunity to represent 10 million Californians as each of us do. So thank you for considering me.
Okay. Momentary pause. Okay. I'll turn it now to Ms. Cicchetti to call roll. Again, when your name is called, please name the person you would like, or the member you would like to serve as vice chair for the next term.
Chair Lieber,
Lieber.
Vice Chair Gaines,
Schaefer.
Member Vasquez,
Lieber.
Member Schaefer,
Schaefer.
Controller Cone.
Lieber.
Thank you so much. So Member Lieber has been elected to serve as the vice chair at the close of this meeting.
Congratulations.
I'm now going to turn it back over to Ms. Cicchetti.
A lunch.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, members, for getting us through the morning, and a huge congratulations to Mr. Gaines, who has served on the board for a number of years now. And this is going to be a great holiday season for many reasons for you. So thank you. And we'll go ahead and go on now. We were scheduled to take our lunch hour at some point in time that was earlier than now, but we will go ahead and go to our lunch at 12:26, and we'll reconvene at 1:26.
Thank you.